Hi, already. Today is Thursday, July 30th, 2026, and our dear friend, our brother Alex Krainer is here with us. Welcome back, Alex.
Good to join you again, Nima. Warm greetings from Croatia to everyone.
Alex, let me start with what's going on between Iran and the United States. And the situation is getting so critical in the West Asia because Saudi Arabia is somehow escalating or making new fronts for itself. They started the attacks on Yemen. Then we see the attacks on Iraq together with the United States. And yesterday there was a funeral in Iraq. Those people who were assassinated by these attacks, and Donald Trump said that he was coordinating the attack with the prime minister of Iraq, which put him in a fragile position. After all, he visited the United States. And we had Iranian attack on Jordan for the first time without being attacked. Iran is attacking Jordan and at the same time attacking the Iraqi Kurdistan. This is what's going on. Then the United States responded last night. They attacked southern part of Iran. They used HIMARS to attack the western part of Iran, in the province of Khuzestan. But I would say most of these attacks were done using HIMARS and ATACMS and in the western part of Iran. Here is what we are today. And looking at the situation, the way that you see the war, what do you find of the conflict? I lost your picture, Alex. Yeah, you're back.
It's my phone. I'm sorry.
Yeah. How do you find the situation right now in the West Asia? Somehow the war is expanding.
I think, Nima, maybe I'll sound like a broken record, but I think that the logic of this conflict is such that Iran has every reason to push forward towards a military victory. What does that mean? That means evicting the United States and Great Britain and their allies from the region, and probably removing Israel from the region. And I think that there are many voices in Iran which are actually stating as much explicitly by this point. They have an upper hand. I think that getting back to negotiations is something that the Iranians have to do because they do need the support and alliance of other countries like Pakistan, like China, like Russia, and so on. And all these countries, I think, are wary of the economic destabilization that is going to result from this conflict. But from the strictly military strategic point of view, Iran has an upper hand. And I think that by pursuing the military solution every day, they're inflicting damage on U.S., British, Israeli alliance that is very, very difficult for them to recover from. We have to remember that there's a logistical aspect to everything. So every piece of equipment, every facility that the Israelis or the Americans blow up. Well, okay, so Israelis are now apparently not participating, except maybe they are. Every piece of equipment or facility that they destroy in Iran, the Iranians can relatively easily recover from. They can repair it, they can rebuild it, they can replace it with other facilities and weapons. Everything that the Iranians destroy in the region, American ships or aircraft or radar stations on their bases, is difficult for the Americans to recover because they are on the wrong side of the planet. Their supply lines are thousands of miles long, and everything that needs to be replaced has to be brought from United States or Western Europe. And so the Iranians have the home front advantage, and they certainly have the escalatory dominance. And from that point of view, they would really be wasting a historical opportunity if they didn't take as much advantage of that as possible. And then, from time to time, there's going to be talks. They're going to be mediated. But I think that the Iranians know very well by now that even if Donald Trump signs an agreement in black and white and in public, that it's not worth the ink that he uses to sign it. So, the Americans have proven this time and time again, not just with Iranians, but, negotiating Minsk I with the Russians, Minsk II, negotiating, the commitment not to expand NATO eastwards. Like if they were willing to be so brazen against Russia, which is a nuclear superpower, what would make anybody think that they would honor their word and their commitment to Iran at all? So I think that the Iranians perfectly understand that. Now, I would imagine that the Saudis understand this as well. And I would imagine that the Gulf kingdoms know it as well. I don't, so, this is why I'm looking at this escalation where the Saudis attack Yemen and then they attack Iraq. And I have to wonder whether Saudis are in the loop at all. Whether this isn't Israeli, American, British false flags that then get attributed to the Saudis in order to preempt any kind of peaceful settlement between Iran and other Gulf kingdoms, because from Iran's point of view, it's better not to fight everybody all at the same time. So if they can have a constructive relationship with the Saudis to tell them, fine, we know you're caught in a trap. We know you can't evict the Americans or the British from your military bases. We will strike at their bases, but we will try to avoid inflicting damage on your energy facilities, on your infrastructure, and so forth. But I think that it's in the Americans' interest and in the Israeli interest to unite the whole region against Iran. So to make sure that the Saudis have no choice but to fight the war on the side of United States and Iran. So I wonder who made these silly decisions to attack Yemen, because that is just, it was completely unnecessary. The bombing of Sana'a was completely unnecessary. I don't see what objective it would achieve. They were supposedly reinforcing their air and maritime embargo on Yemen. But what's the point? It was an Iranian plane who came there for a particular occasion. So I'm very suspicious about this, because it seems incredibly stupid to do that. And then, of course, the Yemenis, who have a massive axe to grind against the Saudis, because the Saudis were waging this extremely brutal, extremely ruthless war against Yemen for 7 years between 2015 and 2022. This war ended effectively, but it never ended formally. There was no peace sign. There was no peace treaty or truce or anything. So, at that point, they just gave the Yemenis a green light to respond and to inflict very heavy damage on the Saudis and to open a completely new war front. Saudis don't have the ability to fight a war on one front, let alone two fronts. They tried to destroy Ansar Allah for 7 years. They ran 25,000 bombing raids. They imposed air embargo, maritime embargo, which resulted in, the whole war resulted in almost 400,000 casualties. but 60% of those was the result of the embargo, the the famine and disease, and they still could not achieve any of their strategic objectives. So why would they start this now, when they know that the Ansar Allah not only survived the war from 2015 to 2022, they are now much more powerful than they were when Saudis were attacking them. And they know that the first thing that the Ansar Allah will do is close the Strait of Bab el Mandeb, right? And effectively bring Saudi oil export to zero. They still have the Suez route, but Suez Canal, you cannot run very large crude carriers through Suez Canal. You have the so-called Suez Max vessels, which I think are about half, if half the size of a very large crude carrier. I think up to 150,000 tons. If I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on that. So it was an extraordinarily stupid thing to do. All their facilities, all their oil facilities, their pipelines are within reach of Houthi drones and missiles. So I honestly suspect that Saudis were out of the loop, and that these bombing raids were decided by, I don't know, CENTCOM, Mossad, MI6, who knows? They were ran from Saudi Arabia. Maybe maybe Saudi officials pulled the trigger, but they didn't. If it's MBS who's calling the shots, I would be surprised, because it's just too much of a mission suicide.
When they said that the United States, together with Saudi Arabia, attacked Iraq, I was somehow suspicious about if the United States would do that together with Saudi Arabia. It's difficult, to do such, because you have to train, you have to get prepared before that. It's not just getting out and saying, "Let's go out, Alex. You go with your car, I go with my car." It's not like this. This is the operation. It's not. That's why I don't know if it was all Saudi Arabia going and attacking Iraq, or the United States without Saudi Arabia.
I would expect as much, Nima. And I hate that the United Kingdom never gets an honorable mention in all these analyses, but the British have a very, very prominent role, not just in Israel, but also in Saudi Arabia. And the British were the primary enablers of the Saudi war against Yemen from 2015 to 2022. They were the main moving force and the main enabler and supporter with how do you call it, spare parts and armaments and the maintenance of Saudi aircraft. I think that the BAE company, the British aerospace company, the military industrial contractor, they had something like 6,000 mechanics and engineers in Saudi Arabia during that war in order to support Saudi effort. And without them, the Saudis couldn't maintain that war for even a few weeks, because all this military machinery requires a fairly heavy maintenance. And a lot of hate gets directed to the United States and Trump, but they are just cogs in this machine. And the British are very, very prominently involved. They just keep it quiet. And the media never mention them. And most military and strategic analysts never mention them, but they are there. And so these decisions could have been taken by the Americans. They could have been taken by the British. It could have been taken by elements of CENTCOM connected with the CIA and with, MI6 and the Mossad. Didn't it just emerge that one prominent Israeli person in the United States, the name just escapes me now, was almost in daily contact with General Cooper, who is the head of CENTCOM? So, the headlines will say like, oh, Saudis did this. Maybe it wasn't exactly Saudis, or maybe, we need specifics. Which Saudis exactly, and how did they make the decision? Was MBS in the loop? How did all this happen exactly? Again, the risk benefit analysis from the point of view of MBS, of Saudi Arabia as a kingdom, is so skewed in favor of risk that I suspect that this is some form of a false flag, and that decisions were taken elsewhere.
Yeah, I assume there's something going on behind the scene that we don't know. You mentioned how important is the communication between Iran and other GCC countries, and we know that yesterday, after more than 3 weeks, we had the first Qatari LNG ship passing through the Strait of Hormuz and using the Iranian route, the part of Iran, because the southern route is not working. So it means that they're communicating, they're talking to each other, at least Iran and Qatar. This is what's going on. And the problem is, Alex, right now is the war is somehow expanding, and I don't see anything good coming out of this for the United States. For example, if they're short of ammunition, if they're short of interceptors, why do they need to expand the war? And with that concept, it seems to me, you mentioned Russia, Iran, and these two countries are in a Russia has been in this war for more than 4 years, and next February we're gonna hit the 5 years of the war in Ukraine, which is a war
Yeah.
of attrition. This is not something new for Russia. Russia knows the reality of this war, and Iran is learning, in my opinion. And because the time you've mentioned the necessity of having negotiations with the United States, but how is that possible? Russia tried that over and over with the two administrations, with the Biden administration, and right now with the Trump administration, which was supposed to put an end to the war in 24 hours. That didn't happen. And I think Iran is on the same path. And as time goes by, they're going to learn that it's impossible to talk with the Trump administration.
It's not that it's impossible, Nima, but I think it's useless in the sense of gaining any direct benefit, de-escalation, commitment, or anything like that. I think it's nevertheless always useful to talk to the other side, because you can always exchange information. You can always prevent unintended escalations from taking place. Escalations that might take place by misunderstanding or just mistakes, when somebody fires off some kind of a weapon because maybe they saw something on the radar, but it wasn't a real thing, or and then in the long term, you always want to have interlocutors that you can have an understanding with, that you can, because every war, ultimately every single war, it doesn't matter how much people might hate each other at a given moment, every war always ends up at a negotiating table. Some kind of a truce, some kind of a peace treaty has to be signed. And so you do want to cultivate those relationships regardless. But I think that nobody has any illusions anymore that the United States, or it's not just the United States, it's this whole Western system. They are essentially incapable of honoring any commitment, because they will make the commitment in order to obtain some immediate concession. But as soon as it's expedient for them to break their commitment, they will, absolutely. And it's not just, we will not, like if you withdraw from Eastern Germany, we will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. And then they add, they go 1,400 kilometers to the east. Minsk One accord with Russia, Minsk Two. How many times did they start negotiations and they then killed the negotiators, their counterparts? It's the and it's kind of a tradition because the United States made I think about 400 treaties with the Native Americans, the people we still call Indians, and they broke every single one of them. So this system has a certain nature. It's perfidious. It's completely unreliable. It's ruthless, and it only recognizes the language of force. So ultimately, you have to build your strategic position by force. But while you do that, you're still going to be talking to them. You have to. That's just the nature of these conflicts. They have to end someday. And so I think that at this time, nobody has any illusions about how useful the talks are. They will not cause the United States to back down. They will not cause anybody in this Western alliance to honor their commitments. But nevertheless, you have to have the diplomatic relations because you're going to have trade relations, because you're going to have cultural relations and sports. And so you can't, let's say that you would want to avoid breaking the world off into autarkic blocks, like North Korea for a time, or Albania, that had completely, sealed its borders and had virtually no diplomatic relations with anybody. People were forbidden to travel. All channels of communications were broken off. You could not see foreign televisions in Albania. You could not have a passport, and on and on. So I think that you probably want to avoid this. So the communications and the contacts are going to continue, and you want to cultivate them, at least to have as much understanding, as much exchange of information as possible, without expecting that the conflict will be resolved through diplomatic means. That's probably not going to happen.
Yeah. It was reported by NBC that Trump lost his temper during a security meeting, shouting and cursing out of frustration over the military options presented to him and the lack of progress toward a deal with Iran. This is the situation, I think, perfectly describes the situation with Donald Trump. They have put themselves in a position. There is nothing. Iran is not interested in having any sort of talks. So far, it seems that they want to put tremendous pressure on the Trump administration, at least for the time being. That's why they're choosing that sort of attitude. And if you put yourself in the shoes of the Trump administration, what would you do with this chaos they have made so far? And it doesn't seem that would be a military option for them. Let's assume they're going to attack. Last night they attacked the southern part, the western part of Iran. The same, nothing important, nothing strategic.
Well, Nima, I don't know what I would do, because first of all, they should never have started this war, because the outcome was predictable. And Trump was advised even by his military advisors and generals that he had around himself on the chiefs of staff not to do this, because it was well established that taking down the Iranian government was probably not achievable. I mean, there are reports by American intelligence agencies, by British intelligence agencies, that's not going to happen. These ideas that there's fractions in Iran and that there's these pro-Western faction and the and the hardliners, they knew that IRGC had an iron grip on the country, and that, it was illusory to think that you will cultivate pro-Western faction of the government and that you're going to make it possible for them to take over. Bringing in the Shah was just as silly. Defeating Iran militarily is probably one of the dumbest miscalculations in the history of miscalculations, because, this very same war machinery that they call the most powerful military in the history of the Milky Way galaxy and so on, they spent 20 years trying to take control of Afghanistan. And Afghanistan was nowhere near as powerful as Iran is. And they failed, and they had to, they dislodged the Taliban temporarily, and then they had to return the country back to the Taliban after 20 years, right? And then, they ran all these proxy efforts against Yemen, against Ansar Allah through Saudi Arabia for 7 years, and then in December of 24, they started the Operation Prosperity Guardian, and they brought their warships and the British warships and the French and the Italian warships, and they all had to tuck tail and leave the effort behind. And then Trump came and he launched the Operation Prosperity Guardian, and he was promising, he would bomb them like nobody's ever seen before. And in the end, that all failed. Well, if you were unable to dislodge Ansar Allah in Yemen, what makes you think that you can defeat Iranian government, which has been preparing for this clash for many, many years, for more than 2 decades? And so any sensitive piece of military equipment, their facilities, everything has been dug in deep underground, if you even know where it is. Anything you can blow up maybe is a decoy, or it's something that can be easily replaced. So you're wasting your bombs. You're keeping your troops exhausted, depleted, demoralized, because, according to reports from the US military, the troops are perfectly aware that they're fighting a war for Israel, not for the United States. So the whole thing is strained in every way possible. So in many podcasts, and maybe I mentioned that in conversations with you, Nima, I thought that for the administration, there was only one winning move. And that one winning move was to toss Israel under the bus. Because Israel is, experiencing its dying agony anyway. Israel does not have a future. So maybe putting them out of their misery, forcing them to reform, forcing them to accept a two-state solution, that could have been a winning gambit for the Trump administration. But obviously, for some reason that I don't exactly understand, there are theories. There are many theories. I'm aware of most of these theories. I just don't know which one is closest to the truth. Trump chose to make alliance with Benjamin Netanyahu, a genocidal war criminal, and to fight for Israel to the bitter end, in a fight that is destined to be lost and that is destined to cost the United States something that we cannot even envision at the moment, because it's not just that the oil price is going to go up. It's not just that the interest rates are now at a 17-year high, which is making the funding of US government more and more expensive. It's not just that the government is now apparently involved in manipulating markets to keep interest rates from exploding and to keep oil prices from exploding. This is an extremely, extremely risky gambit. I mean, the CEO of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange said that, if the US Treasury is involved in manipulating markets, and practically everybody in the markets suspects that they are, that this is risking a biblical disaster. So effectively, Trump administration is risking the whole country, is risking the future of over 300 million people to fight a war for Israel, a genocidal criminal crap state, which is doomed to fail anyhow. So, if you ask me how to explain that, I'm aware of the theories going around. I don't know what can possibly explain this. This is like acute schizophrenia or something. It's practically mental asylum material.
Yeah, we had Naftali Bennett talking about Qatar. These are terrorists in suit, and he said that about Qatar. We know how they feel. He said the same thing about Turkey. They're putting pressure on the United States not to sell those F-35 to Turkey, and this is the for the United States. I think it's so important to reassess, reevaluate its role in the West Asia. I don't know that moment is coming to the mind of those people in Washington, or what do you make of it?
I think we're very, very far from this moment, Nima, and we can see that from the fight for the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act for 2027, which now has two clauses in it, one of which effectively merges U.S. military with Israeli military, and the other one merges American military intelligence with the American intelligence with Israeli intelligence, which means that effectively, Israel is going to get access to the levers of control of the American security state and of the American military and intelligence apparatus. And this fight in Congress is almost not even a contest. Congressman Massey and Ro Khanna have tried to introduce an amendment which would strip out, or which would allow at least a vote on these provisions to give the congressman the opportunity to say, okay, these have to be stripped out of the end of the National Defense Authorization Act. But these motions were all defeated. So it's the whole legislative branch of the United States is now completely subordinated to the interests of the state of Israel, which is completely amazing, Nima. This is, how to explain this? This is like a shitty little genocidal state in the Mediterranean, on the other side of the world from the United States, which is failing, which is completely dependent on the United States, not only for their defense, but also for their economy, right? And it's tiny. It's the size of New Hampshire, fraction of the population, fraction of the GDP. It's just a tiny little parasite, yet it controls the world's foremost superpower almost completely. That's a very, very difficult thing to explain. And, when people say, oh, well, that's because Israel has the support of the wealthy Jewish donors. Okay, yes, but there are wealthy Arabs. Arabs have a lot of money. Russians have a lot of money. The Chinese have a lot of money. How many members of Congress are controlled by Russian interests? How many members of Congress are controlled by Arab or by Chinese interests? Mexican drug cartels have a lot of money. There has to be an explanation about how this small group manages to exert such a complete control over the global superpower, which is ostensibly a democracy. So it should be run by the will of the people. It should be defined by what the American people choose. I think it's an amazing thing, and we need an explanation. And the fact that Jewish donors have a lot of money, that's not an explanation. A lot of groups have a lot of money, but I guarantee you, Nima, that if the wealthy Arabs wanted to spend their money in the way that the wealthy Zionist billionaires spend, they would not be allowed. Wealthy Russians would not be allowed to exercise this kind of control. Their bank accounts would be frozen. They would be assassinated. They would be expelled from the United States. So there's a higher order of control that is being exercised. And in the ultimate analysis, I propose that this should be called an Anglo-Zionist conspiracy, because it's not just Israel. Israel is and has been since its birth, since its conception, the creation of the British Empire. And the British establishment never relinquished control over Israel. It's always hidden, but it's always there. And if you go to many policy papers published by think tanks like the Chatham House and the Policy Exchange, you see that they have a very, very tight relationship. The British have a very, very tight relationship with Israel. In fact, in 2021, they signed a special strategic partnership. And this strategic partnership basically is at the foundation of this relationship. It's not discussed, it's not taken into account in all these analyses, but it's there. And so I think that it's the axis of control runs from the city of London to New York and Washington on the one side, and on the other side, it runs from the city of London to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
The only way, Alex, I can understand the situation with the United States and the leverage Israel has on the United States is the combination of those people who are called the blob, the deep state. In my opinion, the more than 90% Zionists. It doesn't mean that you have to be necessarily Jewish or, they're Zionists. It means that their priority is Israel. Israel first, and then the United States comes second. That's the priority for them. And there is no other, they were born in the United States, they were raised in the United States, but they're Zionists. They're basically more loyal to Israel than the United States. That's why I think they can get, all of it. It's not just about the money, it's about the way that they grab the power in the United States.
Yes, absolutely correct. It's important to point that out. Many of them are not Jewish at all. Marco Rubio is not Jewish. Pete Hegseth is not Jewish. Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, they were not Jewish. The list is very long. Ted Cruz is not Jewish. And then you have a lot of Jews who are very, very passionately opposed to the state of Israel and to the whole Zionist project. It's something else. And, it definitely does have its eschatological dimension. And, that brings us to the realm of esoterical things. But, we were warned in the Bible that there are those who say that they are Jews, but they lie. They worship at the synagogue of Satan. And there's an agreement about this in Muslim and Jewish and in, how do you call it, Christian eschatology. And so we have to be careful to distinguish that, not all Jews are Zionists and not all Zionists are Jews. This is some kind of a mafia, almost. And I would propose that, let's pretend that this is Italian mob. You could say that, okay, Italian mob is a terrible criminal organization and they do terrible things, but that doesn't mean that all Italians are mobsters. right? Nor does it mean that all the mobsters are Italian. You wouldn't hate all Italians over the crimes of the mob. So it's a very peculiar conspiracy. It is a conspiracy. There's no doubt about that. But it's an Anglo-Zionist conspiracy. I think that its epicenter, its headquarters is the city of London, which is where the state of Israel was planned and conceived and created. Those strings are still viable and active. And I think that the United States, the Trump administration, are just the latest cog in the machine, because as much as Trump is easy to hate, and as much as it's become popular to blame everything on Donald Trump is pursuing a continuity of policy that goes back decades. You know, this harassment of Iran didn't start with Trump. The support for the state of Israel, it never started with the Trump administration. So I see a little bit of danger in blaming everything on Trump, because then again you start creating that illusion that, like, oh, when we get rid of Trump, then everything's going to be better. No, it isn't. It's going to be the same. You have to get to the root causes of the problem, and Trump is not the root cause of the problem. Trump, if anything, has crossed the line of no return, meaning that he will end up ushering the final solution, which will be eviction of Western colonial powers from the region, from Western Asia, and probably the final destruction of the state of Israel. That's going to be Trump's contribution, even though it's an unintended consequence of his actions.
Yeah, I think your point is so important, which is, I don't know if you saw the video of Lindsey Graham talking about the war in Iran, on Iran.
Yes,
he's talking about in 3 to 4 weeks, he's talking with Jake Sullivan on phone, describing how the process of that war would be. And he says these Arab states are all prepared to join, and they had a plan before starting. It wasn't just Donald Trump and his administration. It's all about the establishment in the United States. Jake Sullivan, we know him. We know Anthony Blinken, Jake Sullivan. These people are the mastermind of the war in Ukraine. They started the war. They continued the war. They destroyed Ukraine, and they're still, trying to gain the support from the Trump administration for the war in Ukraine. This is not something. This is something so. The policies are coming from the roots of these people. They're all connected in the same root, and they believe that they cannot see Russia getting out of this. They want to bleed Russia. They want to bleed Iran, in my opinion. They don't want to lose that sort of suffering that they're inflicting on these people. This is so important in their mind. They see, because the war in Ukraine is the same. When it comes to the war in Ukraine, let's assume Russia is not trying to do something and trying to convince Iran to negotiate. What about Ukraine? Do you see any sort of end to the war in Ukraine as time goes by? Donald Trump met with Zelensky the day he met with Benjamin Netanyahu, and the funeral. After that, they had the funeral. They're basically talking about the continuation of the war in Ukraine. Nothing of the negotiation talks to put an end to the war. It means that this cycle is going on and on and on and on, and nobody knows what. My point is, these two countries, Iran and Russia, maybe there is some sort of talks between the two. They have to deplete the United States as much as possible, physically depleting the United States. That's the only solution for them. I don't know what do you make of it?
No, I absolutely agree with that. I think that maybe there were some hopes that Trump is going to change the course of the American foreign policy. I actually was among the people who was hoping that this would be reality, that this would be effective. But this all came crashing down when he attacked Iran, because then it was very obvious that what he was promising and what he was delivering was opposite. And the fact that we have the continuity of all these policies over so many administrations, and it's not, Nima, Jake Sullivan and Antony Blinken, they were not the architects of the war in Ukraine. They were also cogs in the machine who had their, who had their role. But Russia, eastward expansion of NATO started almost immediately in the early 1990s. This was an effort that never stopped. It was basically an effort to put Russia under siege. And, Iran was always in their crosshairs the whole time, as was China. So this is just continuation of the same thing. It was in 2008 or 2009 that the NATO issued the Bucharest Memorandum, in which they said that Ukraine and Georgia would become NATO member countries. Not that they would negotiate maybe, no, they said Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. This is nothing other than provoking a war against Russia. So that was 2008, 2009. I forget exactly the year. Then you had the coup in 2014. Then you had the war on Syria, 2011. And again, so all of this was done under Bush Sr., under Clinton, Bush Sr., Obama administration, Biden administration, Trump. Trump maybe is the biggest surprise because he was the most explicit in promising an end to all these policies, making a deal with Russia, never going to war against Iran, and so forth, bringing the troops home, and then after barely a year in office, he makes a 360-degree turn, goes exactly in the same direction as previous administrations. And so, it's really important that we have a coherent explanation for how this happens and why this happens and who ultimately pulls the strings. And we do have some clues. I've always insisted that the levers of control ultimately lead to the banking oligarchy. And I think it's very significant because I mentioned Britain a lot because they have a very important role in all this. And I think that we got a very important clue from a former British Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who told us that when she became a prime minister, she thought she was going to run the policy because she was elected to run the policy. And then when she came into number 10 Downing Street, she discovered that actually it's Bank of England that's running the policy, that she has no control over British policy. So yeah, it's the banking cartel, apparently. And the lever of power that they enjoy, that they use and wield to control the situation, is money and credit. That's what they use to buy the American Congress. That's what they used to buy people like Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton and all these Congress people who vote in favor of merging American and Israeli militaries. I mean, Ron Paul just voted in favor of that. It's incredible. But this happened, after Thomas Massey, who tried to stand up for the United States and against foreign influence, was defeated with the money of the Zionist donors. And who are they? Miriam Adelson and a bunch of Wall Street hedge fund billionaires. So it's always this same cabal that's pulling the strings. And this is, I think, who we should look to explain these events, not Donald Trump, not even Biden, not even Sullivan or Blinken or Hillary Clinton, none of them. It's a level above them. That's where the explanation lies. And it's important to understand that, because if the American people vote Trump out of office and vote, I don't know, let's say they vote in Thomas Massey or they vote in Joe Kent as the next president, or Kent Massey ticket or Kent Massey with Tulsi Gabbard, the money power will ultimately prevail again. And so we're not going to get out of this by voting. We need to address the banking oligarchy and their ability to influence the political process.
Yeah. Alex, do you think that the new blockade on Ukraine would bring the war, would change the timing of the war?
I think it will probably speed up Ukraine's defeat. I think there's no doubt about that, because Ukraine has a broken economy, and they depended on commodity exports through the port of Odessa, exporting wheat and corn and whatever they grow there. This was one viable source of foreign exchange for them. One last way that they could service the loans on which they depend. So once that is cut off, that's pretty much game over. You can run some foreign trade by trains, but you can load up 50,000 tons of grain on one ship. I don't know how much you can put on the train, but it's going to be a fraction of that. And then ships, when they go, they go. They run these big engines and they float on the sea. Trains, you have to power them. It's a lot more work. It's a lot more restrictive. So that's certainly going to create a massive bottleneck on Ukraine's exports and their foreign exchange, and because it's going to reduce their ability to service foreign debts, it's probably also going to have the indirect effect of crashing the value of Ukrainian bonds, which is something that many Western bondholders own now. So I think that they're extremely nervous about that. And in fact, this is one of the reasons why the war is continuing, because if Ukraine capitulated, all the loans and all the bonds that foreign creditors own vis-a-vis Ukraine, the value of those assets would go to zero. So they can't allow Ukraine to stop fighting, because as long as they're fighting, there's a hope that Ukraine wins or saves itself somehow. Whatever, maybe they bring the United States back into the war. Maybe NATO unites to go back into the war. Once Ukraine is defeated, that's hundreds of billions in loans and bonds to Ukraine that are going to go to zero. So again, it's the financiers who are not letting wars end.
I think one of the problems with Europe today is that they thought before the war in the West Asia started, they thought that they can continue the war. They were buying a lot of weapons from the United States, but the war in the West Asia has, changed everything for them, for the continuation of the war in Ukraine, because they are not that capable of producing the arms that Ukraine need for the continuation of the war. They're producing some drones, but the Patriot system, everything is produced in the United States, and there is a new contract between Pentagon and Lockheed Martin in the United States. It says in the next 7 years they're gonna replace what they have used during the war, 40 days of war against Iran. And it's 7 years, it's going to be the end of Ukraine. I think they're not going to get back on the same track they were before. That's why I think the case of Ukraine is somehow sealed. I don't know how do they feel in Europe about that. The drone
I
case is
s-
somehow it's so it's just fancy. You feel that Ukraine can continue the war with drones by the use of drones.
yeah, well, even it appears that even Ukrainian military brass are very tired of this because it's creating scenes for the media. Large plumes of smoke coming from Russian refineries and warehouses and apartment blocks or wherever, but it's not moving the dial in terms of strategic situation on the ground, even slightly in favor of Ukraine. It's doing nothing. It's just putting scratches on Russia, scratches that Russia will repair in time and they'll recover. But meanwhile, Ukraine is losing ground rapidly. Their defensive lines are buckling increasingly faster and faster. And so this drone warfare is just basically again at the behest of the West. And the West just wants to weaken and demoralize Russia. They don't care whether Ukraine wins or not wins. I mean, sorry, that's not correct to say. They do care that Ukraine wins, but the principal objective is not Ukraine. They're not interested in Ukraine being um, an independent, prosperous nation. Ukraine is basically their bludgeon to be used against Russia. And so they're ready to use up Ukraine down to the last Ukrainian because the main objective is to weaken, to destabilize, to demoralize Russia. And so using drone warfare for them is effective because it could achieve those objectives. It could uh, force a war fatigue to set in Russia. They could demoralize the Russian people. They could cause them to be anxious and afraid, so they maybe turn against their government. But it's merely using Ukraine in this sense. It's not helping Ukraine in a strategic sense. So Ukrainian military is tired of this. It's almost a distraction. They're losing on the ground, but they're entertaining themselves by causing these fireworks and big plumes of smoke over Russia, and then they take video footage of it and they show everybody and they say like, look what we're doing to the Russians, and there's so much more that's coming after that. And so in the end, it's going to fail. Lockheed Martin's Patriot missiles, they are 1990s technology. They had a few newer versions, but they're not very effective, and they're particularly not very effective in the age of these drones, which are increasingly more capable, more accurate. They fly in swarms. The Russians have now they evolved the original Shahid drones. They now have jet engines on them, so they are much faster. They're capable of flying at very high altitudes for drones, like 5,000 meters. So they're out of reach for a lot of anti-air um, uh, weapons. And then if you use Patriot missiles on them, you have to use one or two Patriots to strike one drone. And those Patriots cost several $1 million each. And these drones cost like, I don't know, $20,000 a piece. And then the Russians use a lot of decoys. From the ground, you cannot tell which is the real drone and which one is the styrofoam copy that just flies to attract anti-air. So it's an unwinnable war. And in 7 years, maybe they will be producing more Patriots. But by then, Ukraine will be defeated. And the American and British bases in the Middle East will be all destroyed, and they will be evicted from Western Asia. And Israel might not exist at all by then. Hassan Nasrallah said that Israel wouldn't live to see its 80th birthday. Let's find out. Maybe he was right. And so, what are they going to do with all those patriots?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Always a pleasure, Nima, and until the next time.
See you soon. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.